Good morning, welcome back, and welcome to all of those who are joining for the first time. Good morning to everyone in the relevant time zones, and good afternoon to those of you in Asia. We are absolutely delighted that we've got so many people tuning in from all over the world, apart from the places that are, of course, still asleep in the Western Hemisphere. But today's, or rather, this morning's session is a reintroduction to Il Cascinone, a winery with a view, a stunning view, as I can attest. And to talk us through that, we're joined by John Leach, who is the commercial director at Araldica Vini, our long-time, very close partners in Piemonte. So I shall hand over to John to introduce himself and to talk us through a little bit about Araldica and of course Il Cascinone. So good morning, John.
Good morning. Good morning, Andy. Right. Yeah, a little bit of an introduction to Araldica for those who don't know us. We're a cooperative seller based in Castiglione in the Monferrato area in Piemonte. Founded in the 50s, 1954. And today we have just over 200 grower members. And very simply, I suppose, about 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago, we started investing actually in estates and property, as well as vinifying our members' fruit. How that came about, simply as a financial construction, we're not allowed to retain any profit, retain any surplus. So if there is any, it is reinvested in the business, or it goes back to the membership as a dividend, if you like. And so 1999, we bought the vineyards you can see in the picture above, Il Cascinone, and the house. The estate is in total about 100 hectares, of which it's broadly 50% under vine. In fact, the slope you can see in that picture just above is the Crociera, which is vineyard that was planted in 99 and all over to Barbera d'Asti. And I think we still think of it as young vine, but now at 20 years old, it's more than established.
Stunning. Yeah, it's a beautiful single vineyard, and from memory, it's very steep. I was looking at it thinking, you wouldn't, picking it could be hazardous. It's almost like sort of Moselle Côte Rôtie levels of steepness. What's the angle?
It is, which that legislates that everything, of course, has to be picked by hand. There's no way you'd get a harvester up and down these hills. And it gives us also, I suppose, a very good exposure, but you get varying exposures. And the soil is mainly, it's all chalk clay soils. But if you look at it, and particularly if you look at it in the spring before there's much vegetation, or you look at it in the autumn, you can see the different colors and the different soils that are there. There are different zones that suit different varieties. I mean, most of the vineyard is given over principally to Barbera or to Moscato, but we have a little patch of Riesling, we have a little patch of Sauvignon Blanc, and depending on the exposure, now that those two white varieties, those two aromatics, are quite low down in the valley. So although they face south, they catch quite a lot of shadow in the afternoon. So they are relatively cool. But yeah, it's all fairly steep.
Fabulous. Okay, so just zooming back out a little bit, and we've certainly got some images to sort of show the landscape. So where are we? We're in the Monferrato Hills, right, John?
Yeah. And looking at that, so that's looking pretty much directly west from the Cascinone, and you can see we're in rolling hills, still quite steep, as around 400 meters, so over 1,200 feet, or around 1,200 feet above sea level. And I think if we scroll forward in a second, what looks like a line of cloud there is actually the Alps. That mountain was the Monviso. And I suppose it's about 80 kilometers away as the crow flies. It's about an hour and a half hours drive to Torino. And that gives you an idea of our proximity to the Alps. In the end, Cascinone, we're pretty much in a bowl of all the mountains. due north, we've got the Dolomites, and so on the western flank, the Alps, then the Dolomites behind us. Coming back down on the eastern side, you get sort of the Apennines, pre-Apennines, and then due south, there's the coastal range that's sitting pretty much directly in front of Genoa. You may know, I mean, we certainly in the summer, there's always a risk of storms, always there's a hail risk. As yet, we haven't been hit badly at Cascinone. Just down the road in Nizza a couple of years ago, there was huge hailstorms, but you can see these storms sometimes sort of circling in the bowl. It's very dramatic landscape. Very dramatic.
Absolutely, and presumably these are quite young soils. I mean, these hills were pushed up at the same time as the Alps. Is that right?
Yeah.
So you've got quite young limestone sort of clay soil.
Yeah, I think actually clearly at some time they were below a sea. You know, you can see that the chalk deposits. That there was also, you know, there's a lot of calcium there.
Absolutely. Okay, and this is the Monferrato Hills. You're really in the heart of Barbera d'Asti, the DOCG. So Barbera is the star of this region. Yeah,
very much, and it's so suited to this area, and it is our number one. We don't really grow much Nebbiolo in the area, and the two premium varieties would be Moscato or Barbera in terms of what's there as a DOCG. And Barbera gets the best vineyard sites, really bar none. And it was a point I think you and I were talking about recently, and it's one of my hobby horses. It's something I tend to like to evangelize about. But why is Barbera d'Asti that much better? And clearly I'm paid to say that it is, or to believe that it is. But I suppose if we counterpose it against Barbera d'Alba, Barbera d'Alba is always fantastic. I'm not detracting from it. And broadly, the more people that recognize and know Barbera, the better. But I think Barbera d'Asti tends to be a little bit more effusive. It's more concentrated, richer. An adjective I always come back to, more friendly. In the Alba zone, across towards Barolo, Nebbiolo is always going to be their number one, their king grape. And they tend to call it the king of wines and everything else. And that's fine. But then beyond that, probably Dolcetto in the Dogliani, before they even think about Barbera. Consequently, because Barbera over there doesn't fetch the market price, it tends to go on lesser, meaner soils. As a consequence, I think their Barbera speaks more of the area than the grape. And it does have a little bit more of an austerity, a little bit more of a Barolo Barbaresco feel to it. Whereas I think ours, in those best exposures, it gets super ripe. I mean, when it's in the vineyard at harvest time, they are black. They are sooty black grapes, and they have to be very ripe. You know, we're achieving alcohols 14.5 plus, and the sugar levels need to be there to match the acidity. But when they are, it's the most gorgeous, accessible, rich red that I think you can get your hands on.
Fabulous. Yeah, it is a real joy, a real personal favorite. Lovely that lovely lively acidity that you associate with all northern Italian, all the great northern Italian red wines. But then that plushness and generosity of fruit, and as you said, concentration, which is not necessarily there in all northern Italian reds. And it just makes it just a lovely balanced drink and a great food wine. But we'll come on to talking about the finished wine in a little while. Wondering if we could go back onto Il Cascinone and perhaps just talk us through the estate in a little bit more detail about what makes this such a special site for Barbera and the other varieties that you have planted there. A little bit about perhaps the viticulture that you practice. I know it's a really important feature of Araldica is the care that goes into the vineyards, and also the long-term vision and the sustainability piece. And once we've gone through that, perhaps we'll talk about the vinification. I should just add for everyone tuning in, if you've got any questions at all, and I can see one has popped up there, so I'll come to that in a second. Please type it in the chat. And if it doesn't come to you now, then contact your account manager, and we'll be delighted to pass those questions on to John and our other colleagues at Araudica if we can't answer them ourselves. Got a question from Norway, John.
I've just seen it. Yeah.
Okay, great.
One of the best things about the cooperative model, in terms of then how that relates to both to the Cascinone, I think I touched on it earlier, is that we can't retain a surplus. We're not allowed to sit on profit like a dragon on gold. It must be reinvested, or it must be paid back to the membership. That, I suppose, means that in terms of capital-intensive projects like buying the Cascinone, they become easier. Having also, we get some tax breaks, and that's part of being a cooperative, So we get co-investment from the region or from central government, which allows these projects to happen. Also, then with the sustainability thing as well, I was trying to work out whether it added a premium or not in terms of price. And I think it's front heavy. It's all about the capex and the investment at the front, and that allows us to do those things. Longer term, there shouldn't be a price premium. If we're doing the right thing, being sustainable is not virtue signaling. It's doing something that can endure a long time. So that's another real positive of the cooperative thing. The only other thing I'd say about the cooperative, it's very important as a business model, but I would view it as a business model. And I do view our members as our shareholders, and that, we, Claudia, myself, are appointed management. And we shouldn't sort of get too inflated or think we're too clever. We're there to do a job. Quickly looping back also, Andy, so just before we then talk about the soils, the winery, everything else, one thing I did want to say about Barbera as well, you mentioned the low tannin profile. The acidity is the architecture of the wine. And consequently, Barbera, although it's plush, although it's rich, it's got a lot of shape. It will endure. Carlo and I last year were tasting back to some 99 Rive, and still a phenomenal color, really deep, almost still ruby rather than having gone garnet. And there is a little bit of tannic structure there. I mean, I think as part of my sort of rehearsed scripts, I often say, low tannin or very low tannin profile. It's not to say it's not there. In different vintages, it's more or less prevalent. Also, I think it derives a little bit in terms of lignins from the time it spends in wood, but generally the barrel time, I think, polishes it more than gives it structure. Okay, shall we flick through? So we've seen some of the vineyard slides. You see the proximity to the Alps.
Yeah.
There. So that's springtime. At the moment, actually, I was watching, like everyone else, almost house arrest at the moment due to COVID. I was feeling second homesick and watched the Milan San Remo yesterday and realized we were at 29 Celsius in Piemonte.
Oh, wow.
And so although that's those spring shoots and those early leaves there, that was springtime. At the moment, the temperatures are due to go back down towards 0 this week. So we're hoping that we don't get too much young growth that could be hit by frosts. It's the one thing we don't need. But yeah, Italy certainly, Piemonte is waking up and the climate's coming. The vineyards, so training, actually, have we got any of, can you scroll through?
You want a bit of a closer up on?
Yeah, there we are. That gives you an idea. So it's single Guyot, one cane, depending on varieties, between 3 and 5 buds each year. The yields typically here on Barbera, on the older vineyards, will be probably around 6 tons per hectare, something like that.
Okay.
And obviously, as the vines get older, yields drop, but intensity increases.
Excellent. And so would you, that's for Barbera d'Asti, and then you're more vigorous. You've got some Sauvignon Blanc on the site. Generally, that comes in a little bit higher.
It can do. And actually, it's not as regulated, not being a DOCG, but we still want to get concentration and finesse. So there would be no point overcropping it, other than it's what is it, hectare and a half of vineyard, and we'll typically make somewhere around 10,000 bottles maximum, really, in a year. So the opportunity, it's not a workhorse.
No. It's getting quite a bit of love, and I think it's a really nice expression of Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, it's clearly Sauvignon, but it also has a northern Italian accent and a cracking wine. So with Barbera, in terms of and getting back to that, how it ripens, is it an early ripener? Is it a late ripener?
No, late ripener. It's usually the last 10 days or so of September and into early October. It's pretty much the last thing to come in before the Nebbiolo.
Wow. Okay.
So, but then, see, I am getting homesick.
Sorry, John.
That's a nice shot. If we go back,
I'll come back. There you go. Yeah,
the stripy one. That another sustainability practice where we're actually tilling alternate rows at the moment in the winter to avoid soil compaction. So we're actually opening it up, tilling. Beyond that, we've now also completely eliminated on the estate any use of herbicides. We're only mowing the grass or cutting now, rather than using any sort of glyphosate or anything like that. And beyond that as well, thinking about sustainability in the area, we're cutting insecticides as well, using pheromone sexual confusion to try and interrupt breeding cycles rather than actually kill pests.
That's it. I mean, it's incredible. We've not said, but every single Araudica wine now, I believe, is certified sustainable, and that's working with a lot of growers and working closely with each of them to get to that point. And something that I hadn't really appreciated until you'd mentioned is the sustainability certification is not static. It's not a set of criteria that remain the same. It's something that you have to, if you like, show progression on and ramp up.
It's progressive. It's incremental. Again, I think that demonstrates one of the benefits of having the estates. If we have them as our flagship, as our test bed, we can prove that these things can be done with no revenue penalty, if you like, and then roll them out to the membership and show them how to do it. And so, A, we have the example. 2, we actively help them. We've got a team of agronomists who will go around all of the membership as well as our own estates and can guide them and say what the best practice is. So I'm just trying to think. We've talked about herbicides, insecticides, soil compaction. It's also water management. We're starting to introduce more solar generation as well. Energy efficiency, making the things, as I say, sustainability should be about, if you like, a musical note that can be sustained for a long time. It's not about, I jokingly say, beard and sandals. That's not the point. It is about having a business model that we can pass on. And the fact that, as well as being a cooperative, that we are almost a dynasty. Claudio Carlo, his grandpa, Livio before him, was one of the founder members. There is a real thread, and there is clearly a long-term goal that this thing should be, the vineyards, the business, everything should be able to be handed on in town.
Yeah, it sounds as a model, it sounds like you've got a bit of the best of both worlds. You've got the benefits of being, if you like, a family-run company, insofar as there's this long-term vision, there's this passion for the quality of the product that comes out of the cellar door, and on the other side, you've got the innovation and, if you like, the investment that comes from being part of a bigger organization. So, I think we should probably move into, time is moving on, John.
Yeah, let's get into the cellar and talk about the different cuvées.
Yeah, let's get the grapes in. Hang on. Oh, there's a nice view of the winery reception, and that's reception there, isn't it?
That is. So everything picked by hand, then into small plastic receptacles, bins, depending on, but never more than about, I'm just trying to think, probably 300-400 kilos, something like that. So the fruit's not crushing itself under its own weight. With where you are there on the reception, destemmer, crusher, then reds, the berries go straight to the tanks, and we'll see the tanks in a minute. Whites pressed to juice, actually on that reception area, and then pumped to tank. with the reds, sometimes we'll put the grapes actually in a cool room. We've got a very aggressively air-conditioned room, and we might try and bring the temperature down before sending them to the tanks. Just looking at that, it's worth saying, so this, as a cellar, the cellar was finished. So we bought in 99. The cellar was finished by 2004 for our 50th anniversary. And those fermenters, all horizontal, we actually did some tests, some experimentation before they were introduced. And there were 3 different sorts. We had one with mechanized pigeage with, effectively a punching down. We tried one with an iris to do a délestage, an aggressive pumping over, and then these horizontals which have beating arms, a little bit like a food processor on an axle in the center of the tank. And these for Barbera were optimum. And it does come back to that low tannin profile thing, that we can work the grapes really quite hard without getting over extracted, without getting anything coarse, aggressive, phenolic. And also that then they are relatively short ferment periods, and the alcoholic fermentation is around 10 days. And so over that sort of 14-day, 3-week harvest period for Barbera, those tanks will usually get 2 uses each. So
it's incredible. So you can get them from 14 potential alcohol down completely dry. In those, and that works best. I think that's something that Barbera is one of those grapes that we've all drunk a lot of, but seeing the vinification of it, and it is a bit different, which is always fascinating. And then from there, a mixture of different. So here we've got the Botti, and then you've got Barrique as well. So you give it a mixture.
Yeah, the Botte and the Tini, the Tronconique that are there, they came around 2016, 2017. Prior to that, all the wood was small format. We were using Barrique pretty much for everything. And then depending on which vineyard, so the younger vineyard Crociera would get 2nd and 3rd use in maybe 9 to 12 months, and things like Danona, where we had some vines that were up to 100 years old, very concentrated, real structure. They could wear the wood without it looking in any way obvious. So that's where the 1st and 2nd use was coming in, and periods of 18 months. As the market has moved away from more obviously oaky wines, we're trying to find ways to get the maturation there, but without putting too much of a glossy overlay. And so, these ovals, they're 35 hectolitres each, and Slavonian wood. So the surface area in contact with the wood is, from a ratio, less. And also, it's not, then they're not brand new now. And it just creates something that's more mellow. It rounds off the edges without putting, too much of an obvious oaky flavor on. So with things like Crociera, it will be more of these large format vessels. And as we go up the scale, there will still, as the wine can wear it, there will still be more Barrique in there.
Excellent. You touched on the different cuvee, and we took La Crociera, obviously that single vineyard site, that very distinctive exposure. The Rive you touched upon, and that's, as I understand it, that's coming from older vines from a slightly different part of the estate.
Yeah, 3 different vineyards for Rive. So Belvedere, Sully, and actually Palazzino. We saw Palazzino, which is part Moscato and then part Barbera vineyard. And then the old vine site is Danona. Which, as I said, some of the vines, when we purchased that vineyard back in 99, it predated any vineyard record, but we think about 100 years old.
Wow, that's incredible. And they are grafted onto different rootstocks, or are they on their own?
Yeah, everything's on rootstocks. We're not immune from phylloxera.
Okay. We're running a bit low on time, John. We're going to have to wrap it up shortly. I could just say, those Botte, you've got some fabulous Pinot Noir in there, and one or two other very exciting things, which I would urge you to speak to your account managers about and have a look at. Maybe John, you just mentioned at Il Cascinone, how we're geared up to host people.
Indeed, that's the fun, and I think a couple of the final slides here, you'll see the terrace, the restaurant, the accommodation. I think we're all itching to get back out as soon as we can. COVID is, it's fairly miserable sitting in one room most of the time. But as and when, yes, there's a restaurant there, we have accommodation. That's how I think people will get an understanding. And I hope fall in love with the area. It's one of those things. I often say we're not particularly marketing savvy. We don't do oodles of PR or advertising. But we know that when people come and visit us and they can actually see the vines, taste the wine in situ, taste some, proper cuisine from the area, it all starts to, the jigsaw comes together and people can understand it. And that's what I'm looking forward to getting back to more than anything. And I hope the rest of you are.
Fabulous. Thanks very much indeed for that, John. Thanks everyone for joining, and I look forward to seeing you for the next session. So have a great week ahead, John.
Fantastic. And you, Eddie. Thanks now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.